Good evening. I'm so grateful to be here. Thankful for this opportunity to come speak to y'all. I can still remember times when I've worked extremely hard to achieve something, to reach a goal of some sort, and it didn't work out in the end. I got discouraged, and I ended up on the outside looking in on something. I can think of many things like that throughout my life. I'm sure all of you can, where you ended up on the outside looking in, you didn't quite reach your goal. Specifically, one thing for me was my junior year of high school. I made it my goal to make the varsity baseball team. That was my sole goal that year. That was what I was working to throughout the year. We had a pretty large senior class in front of us, so we only had a couple of spots available, and so I made it my purpose to work as hard as I could, to outwork everybody else, and to get one of those spots. Anytime that we ran, anytime we exercised, I was the first one done. I did everything to the best of my ability. I would stay late after school, sometimes to the detriment of my relationship. It ended up working out, but she'd show up to my house and I would still be at baseball an hour later. So things like that, and I just worked as hard as I could to try and reach that goal. I improved a lot that fall. I was probably at the peak athleticism that I've ever been in my life. I was as skilled as I have ever been, but I still didn't make varsity in the end. I remember the day that they announced it, they put up a page with all the names on it, and it was just like you see in those movies where people have auditioned for a play and they're looking for what part they got. We all crowded around the paper in a little tiny hallway, and we all looked for what team we got on. And I scanned varsity, didn't see my name. I looked on junior varsity, and there I was. So I went out to my car, and I backed up, and I went across the parking lot where the other players would see me, and I cried for about an hour. It really hurt my feelings. I cried for a long time because I knew that I had done everything that I possibly could, but in the end, it just didn't work out. It's awful to be left out of things like that. The history of mankind, we've implemented rules to try and keep people from being left out. Simple things like participation trophies for children. Even if they didn't win, they still get a trophy. To things as complex and crucial as voting rights for people, or even keeping people from being discriminated against. We try to ensure that nobody is on the outside looking in, that nobody is prohibited from reaching their goals. As Christians, we're supposed to want to be on the outside looking in. 1 John 2:15-17, it tells us that we're in the world but not of the world. We've all heard that phrase. That's where it comes from. We're in the world but we're not of the world. We are outside looking into the world. Because we're not like the members of the world, they might cast us out. They might cast a social death sentence, if you will, on us, and that can be discouraging. Evangelizing to people that keep telling you no and that have cast you out is discouraging. And a lot of Christians have started to believe that they can't help, or they can't make a difference in the sin in the world. They can't make a dent in it because they've gotten discouraged. And this is something that's happened to me. I've been discouraged before from being told no so many times, of just trying to talk to people about Christ. But what we need to understand is that God can use outcasts from society in order to further His will. At Bear Valley, they tell us when you preach at a place, you have to talk about the big man whose name starts with J. So you guessed it. Today we're talking about Jeptha the judge. So if you want to turn over to Judges chapter 11, that's where we're going to be for the majority of tonight. So we're going to have 5 points about Jeptha that we're going to see, and hopefully we can see how God can use an outcast to further His will. The first thing we're going to look at is Jeptha's life. So if we read Judges 11 verse 1, Jeptha the Gileadite was a valiant warrior. So the first thing we see is that Jeptha was brave. Jeptha was courageous. He was a valiant warrior, but he was the son of a harlot, and Gilead was the father of Jeptha. So Jeptha was the son of Gilead and a harlot. Not Gilead's wife, but a harlot. Gilead's wife bore him sons, and when the wife's sons grew up, they drove Jeptha out and said to him, "You shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another." So Jeptha's half-brother grew up. They were legitimate sons. They were considered real sons in that day. And so they cast him out with no inheritance, all because of something that he couldn't change. They cast him out because of who his mother was. So verse 3, Jeptha fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob, and worthless fellows gathered themselves about Jeptha, and they went out with him. So Jeptha was forced to retreat to the land of Tob, and he was surrounded by these worthless inhabitants. This should have been a death sentence on Jeptha. In that day, if you weren't a part of society, you were basically destined to die. So he was forced into the wilderness with nothing. He had no money, nothing to fall back on, no friends, no family. He was simply in Tob, surrounded by these worthless people. But Jeptha survived. Sometimes for us, it can feel like the world is passing a social death sentence on us. Because we hold a different moral standard than them, they view us as evil a lot of times, people that are truly of the world. When we feel that way, let's look at the example of Jeptha here. And let's turn to Christians who feel the same way. Jeptha was considered worthless. He was surrounded by people that were considered to be like him. He was surrounded by worthless people. We need to withdraw and be surrounded by people that are similar to us. We need to go to the church and be surrounded by other Christians. Being surrounded by like-minded people will always uplift us. It will always encourage us. And the most important thing that it's going to do is it's going to help us to see our goal with better clarity. What is the goal of a Christian? Matthew 28:19 and 20. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. Our goal is to go and baptize people in Christ's name and help them become disciples of Christ. That's our goal. And so being around like-minded people is going to help us to reach that goal. Our second point about Jeptha is Jeptha's leadership. Jeptha's brothers, once again, they cast him out. They wanted nothing to do with him until trouble came. Let's look at verses 4 through 6. It came about after a while that the sons of Ammon fought against Israel. When the sons of Ammon fought against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to get Jeptha from the land of Tob. And they said to Jeptha, come and be our chief, that we may fight against the sons of Ammon. So Ammon attacked Israel, and what was their first thought? Why don't we go get that valiant warrior that we kicked out? Let's go get Jeptha out of the land of Tob to lead them into battle. 7 through 10, Jeptha said to the elders of Gilead, did you not hate me and drive me from my father's house? So why have you come to me now when you're in trouble? And the elders of Gilead said to Jeptha, for this reason we have now returned to you, that you may go with us and fight with the sons of Ammon and become head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. And so Jeptha said to the elders of Gilead, if you take me back to fight against the sons of Ammon, and the Lord gives them up to me, will I become your head? And the elders said, the Lord is witness between us, surely we will do as you have said. Jeptha was obviously reluctant. He didn't want to go back. But upon them promising for him to become the leader of Gilead, he agreed. But what's important about Jeptha is in his parameters. Verse 9, he makes it very clear. If you take me back to fight against the sons of Ammon, and the Lord gives them up to me, will I become your head? Jeptha understood that God was the one in control and that God was the one giving the victory to him. So even though the world may reject us, the world may cast us out, we still have to be ready to bring our morals into the society around us. We have to be ready to lead society back to Christ when they choose to accept us, just like Jeptha. He was cast out, but he was ready to lead them in battle. Our third point about Jeptha is Jeptha's lesson. In verses 12 through 28 of Judges chapter 11, Jeptha gives an entire history lesson to the king of the sons of Ammon. So Jeptha tries to be a diplomat before he goes to battle. Verse 13, the king of the sons of Ammon said to the messengers of Jeptha, because Israel took away my land when they came up from Egypt, from the Arnon as far as the Jabbok and the Jordan, therefore return them peaceably now. So the sons of Ammon really believed that it was their land that Israel was living in. It's the land east of the Jordan where the tribes of Dan and the half-tribe of Manasseh were. So they really thought it was their land, but Jeptha understood and he knew his stuff. Jeptha gave them an entire history lesson to show them how Israel gave that land from verses 12 through 28, and he shows them why it doesn't belong to them. If you turned over to number 21, we're not going to tonight, but if you turned over there, you would see how Israel got that land. Israel sent a messenger to Sihon, the king of the Amorites, and he asked, Israel asked, can we pass through your land? And Sihon had three options. He could have said, yes, you can. No, you can't. Or he could have done the ridiculous thing he decided to do and attack Israel for no reason. They were just threatened by them, so he attacked them. Israel defeated them, and so Israel gained that land by conquest. So Jeptha gives the king this entire history lesson. He was ultimately ignored, which is something that we need to understand, is that we might be ignored. But he was forced to turn to God. Jeptha had the answers. We have to study, we have to gain knowledge, and we have to be prepared to teach people when they do come back looking for Christ. When the world does come back looking for morals, we have to be prepared to teach them. Our fourth lesson that we're going to see about Jeptha is Jeptha's Lord. Chapter 11, verse 29. The Spirit of the Lord came upon Jeptha, and he passes through all these places until he gets to the sons of Ammon. But what's important is that the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jeptha. He was righteous. And this is something that happened many times in the Old Testament with Saul, with all of the judges, with Samson specifically. Anytime they do a feat of great strength, they receive the Spirit of the Lord. So they were granted power by God to do what they wanted, or to do what they were supposed to do. And that's the same Spirit that we're given. That Spirit is the same Spirit that is the seal of our salvation. Jeptha single-handedly went with that Spirit to fight the sons of Ammon. In verse 32, Jeptha crossed over to the sons of Ammon to fight against them, and the Lord gave them into his hand. He struck them with a very great slaughter from Aroer to the entrance of Minnith, 20 cities, and as far as Abel-Kermim. So the sons of Ammon were subdued before the sons of Israel. We aren't told that Jeptha took an army. We aren't told who Jeptha brought. Jeptha went and fought the sons of Ammon, and it says that the Lord gave them into his hand. This is like if God took a piece of pottery, put it in Jeptha's hands, and said, do what you had to do, and Jeptha crushed it easily. That is what this was like. Jeptha didn't have to try to defeat them because he had God behind him. He slaughtered 20 cities, and he subdued the sons of Ammon, and he used only that strength that God had given him. And our point from this is, it's very simple and it's short, but it's that we're always going to have victory with the Lord on our side. It's like with Joshua. Joshua was going to lead the people into the promised land. What did God say to him? Be strong and courageous and do not be afraid, for I'm the one going before you. Joshua understood that God was the one behind him, and that's how he was able to be strong and courageous and to not fear. We're always going to have victory with God on our side. Our fifth and our last point about Jeptha, and this one is a bit of a side note, but it's important to the story of Jeptha, is Jeptha's lazy vow. Let's read 30 and 31. Jeptha made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will indeed give the sons of Ammon into my hand, then it shall be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the sons of Ammon, it shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. So Jeptha vowed to the Lord that if the Lord granted him victory, he would give the Lord the first thing that came out of his house when he returned home. Now, when he returned home, I'm sure most of us know the story, but in verse 34, Jeptha came to his house at Mizpah. Behold, his daughter was coming out to meet him with tambourines and with dancing. She was his one and only child. Besides her, he had no son or daughter. So Jeptha makes this lazy vow before God. He goes home, and the first thing to come out is his daughter. So Jeptha's response in verse 35, he saw her, he tore his clothes, and he said, alas, my daughter, you've brought me very low, and you are among those who trouble me. For I have given my word to the Lord, and I cannot take it back. Now what we need to see from this also in verse 36 is the daughter's response. She says, my father, you've given your word to the Lord. Do to me as you have said, since the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the sons of Ammon. How much faith that took from her to say, do what you have to do because you've pledged me to God. Do what you have to do. But ultimately, he followed through on his vow in verse 39. At the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, who did to her according to the vow which he had made, and she had no relations with a man. Now, I might challenge your thinking here, but in verse 31, if we go back to verse 31, it says, then it shall be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the sons of Ammon, it shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. That word for and can actually also be translated to or. So it could say, it shall be that whatever comes out of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the sons of Ammon, it shall be the Lord's, or I will offer it up as a burnt offering. And my point with this is that God abhorred human sacrifice. We've all been taught, or at least I have, growing up in the church, that Jeptha sacrificed his daughter. God hated human sacrifice from the idol worshippers around him. The the pagans would sacrifice to the god Molech and put their children on his hands and kill them and sacrifice them in that way, and God hated it. So I don't believe that he would have allowed Jeptha to sacrifice his daughter. Either way, it comes to the same result. Jeptha would have had to send her to the temple, and she would have had to remain abstinent for the rest of her life. And it would have been a social death sentence, if you will. Jephtha's daughter could have never had kids. And Jeptha could have easily promised to sacrifice the first animal that he saw. But instead, he offered the first thing to greet him, and because of that, his lineage ceased. We have to be careful about what we ask for from God. He doesn't want us to sacrifice anything more than we need to sacrifice to follow Christ, and he certainly doesn't want us to murder anyone. All that God wants is credit for our victories, and he wants us to be obedient to him. And if we truly love God, we're going to be obedient to his commands, and we're going to rely on him for our victories that we earn. Back to our original point is, it can be hard to evangelize in the world today. I know we've all heard stories, some of y'all might have lived through stories, I don't know, of people back in the mid-1900s that would baptize 2 or 3 people a month. That's simply not the world we live in today. People are more relational today, and it's harder to get people to come to Christ because they don't have more knowledge that they have now. So it's hard. And oftentimes our attempts, they seem to go nowhere for us. But I hope that from looking at Jeptha, we saw what being prepared can yield. Judges 12:7 says, Jeptha judged Israel 6 years. Then Jeptha the Gileadite died and was buried in one of the cities of Gilead. Those 6 years that Jeptha judged, Israel was faithful. Israel came back to God because of Jeptha. He brought the people back to God. And that's something that an outcast can do when they come back. When the people do come searching for him, if he's prepared, he can bring them back to God. Let's turn over to 1 Corinthians 3:6 through 8. And this is going to be our final point. It can be easy to get discouraged, but 1 Corinthians 3:6 through 8 tells us, I planted, Apollos watered, but God was causing the growth. So then neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but God who causes the growth. Now he who plants and he who waters are one, but each will receive his own reward according to his own labor. When evangelizing does seem hard, and when we do get discouraged, we have to remember that we're planting a seed in someone's life. Or perhaps the seed has been planted in the past, and maybe we're watering that seed with our example or the words we say. So even if it seems like we aren't bearing fruit, maybe we haven't met the baptism quota for the month, we haven't baptized the 6 people this year that everybody else has, or something like that, we're bearing fruit because we're helping somebody to grow towards Christ. We're helping that seed to grow in what we do. Verse 8 didn't say he'll receive his reward according to the results of his labor. It's according to the labor that he did. It's not about the results that you gain. It's about the work that you do. It's about trying. So in conclusion, God is going to use us to further his will and to lead the world to truth, whether we want them to or not, or whether we want him to or not. When they come searching for it, we have to be prepared. We have to be knowledgeable enough to lead them to Christ. And we have to understand that God wants obedience, and he wants the credit for that victory that we earn in their hearts when they do come seeking the truth. So maybe tonight you've realized that you weren't prepared to lead people back to Christ. You weren't prepared to lead the world back to Christ when they've searched you out. Maybe the opportunities have been there, but you haven't taken them. Maybe you were discouraged and you didn't think you could do anything. Maybe you didn't think they'd be a good Christian, or maybe that they didn't want it for the right reasons. Whatever that is, I hope that tonight you've realized that God is going to use you and that you need to play a part in their growth towards Christ. Even if you aren't the one that's yielding the results, you're helping that seed to grow. Or maybe tonight you've been studying and you've realized that you were one of the members of society that cast Jeptha out. And you want to be an outcast. You want to be one of the worthless people, if you will. One of the Christians. You want to be one of the godly people that has become outcast. Whatever your need is, come now as we stand and sing.